All right, we are live. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. To everyone, I got to tell you, I'm so excited about today's discussion. As a reminder, Brandy and I are members of the Society for Diversity, and we run the Careers and Collaborations Community of Practice group here on LinkedIn. And today's topic is interviewing and salary negotiations. And I got to tell you, everybody, the first person I thought about this woman, and I immediately called her. As soon as I was thinking, Brandy and I had a meeting, and I said, who are we going to do for this? And the first person I thought about, I called her. I had her on speed dial. Well, I think I'm on her speed dial, quite frankly. But nonetheless, I called her and told her what it was. And I said, I think you would be perfect for this. And she said, yes, right away. And so I think you're in for a real treat. I won't give you her whole career history. I'm sure she will tell you about it. But if I think about this, the reason why I thought about her was because she was a legal clerk. If I remember this correctly, she was a legal clerk, but she always had her eye on wanting to be in sports or in entertainment. And she ended up as being a legal clerk at this law firm in LA. And she got on with Disney Studios in their labor relations department as the coordinator. And she was, quite frankly, I think she was pretty happy there. And, she had a good boss and she was learning lots. She was using what she had parlayed, what she had got from her legal experience there. But she wanted more. And she applied with, I'm sure, a number of companies, but Netflix in particular, who she's with now, a number of times. And she got on with them in their DEI because that was another field she wanted to go into. And she got in, and I think she ended up increasing her salary. We won't talk about how much she's making. She tells me how much she's making, but I think it was like 35-40% increase from where she was working. It was what?
It was double.
It was double. It was
And
double.
I actually, since been at the company, it's now more than doubled.
Yeah, I did the math, and I thought it was like 57%, and I was like, maybe let me be conservative in my announcements here, but it was double, y'all. It was double. So yes, so this is who I thought about. So please welcome to the stage Michelle Okwuigbo. Did I pronounce that correctly? Did I
Yes, you
pronounce
did.
that right? Okay. All right. I want to make sure I get that right. Well, I don't want Michael calling me up after this. So, Michelle, thank you for being here. It's good to see you. How are you today?
Thank you. I am doing well. Just coming back from New York, a business trip. So I got in late last night, but doing good so far today.
All right. All right. I was telling Brandy about that. I said that I have been doing a lot of travel, and I said, I hope our guest makes it because I understood she was on a trip in New York and just getting back yesterday, and with a child and doing all of that, and then another one coming, and so she just I can't tell you how proud I am about knowing this particular individual. Can we just jump right? Let's just jump right into this, and I'll kick it off. Again, we're talking about interviewing and salary. So let's get right into um, interviewing. So can you share your approach with the audience on how you prepare for an interview? What are some of the key steps? What are some of the key things that you always do when you're preparing for an interview?
Yeah. So the two main things that I focus on is research and practice. Can't stress these enough. For research, you always, always, always want to research the company. And then you want to practice some interview questions. A general question that they're most likely always going to ask you is to tell you about yourself. And you want to have your elevator pitch down. You want to share a little bit of personal thing about yourself, but you really want to keep it to business. If you have X amount of years of experience that are relevant to the job you're interviewing for, you want to state that. You also want to include your passion and purpose, which should correlate to that job that you're applying to as well. I think having a passion is good, but if you lead with a purpose, I think it's a lot more powerful. Your purpose should be tied to the job you are applying for. For instance, as my dad, Victor, mentioned, I work in DEI in the entertainment industry. And for me, like my purpose is I work in inclusion in the entertainment industry, and I want to make an impact and create a more inclusive and equitable work environment for all. So you want to have a purpose statement similar to that. Um, Now, as far as practicing, again, I am old school. I used to Google a lot of questions. Now, you can also utilize Chat GPT to get a lot of those interview questions. Another one that's common, they'll ask you is, name a challenging something that was challenging at work and how you overcame that. How did you navigate that? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? You want to have some answers to those questions. And like I said, when I practice, I repeat these questions out loud so you feel comfortable. You always want to give authentic answers as well. Interviewers can tell when you're BSing them. And I personally, when I've interviewed and I've gave answers that I thought they wanted to hear versus my truth, those are the jobs I didn't get. When I've told my truth and I was authentically myself, those are the jobs that I ended up landing. Um, so you're going to want to you're going to want to practice those. Um, Another one is you always want to have an answer for at the end of the interview. Most of the time, they're going to ask you, do you have any questions? You want to have some questions. So you're going to want to ask anything that is relevant to the job that you may have top of mind. What is the work schedule? If you have kids or anything like that, and that's a concern for you, you want to ask all those questions. Another good one to ask is, what does success look like in this role? You want to know, what they envision as being successful. So then when you go to the next round, you know what they're looking for, and you can provide answers for that. You can provide, show examples of you being successful as they described in your other roles. So that's very, very important. Another thing, I know we're going to deep dive into salary negotiations, but you want to have that number in mind going into the interview. So that's something you should also be researching is your market value. If you're in California and New York, they should be listing the salary range for the role. So if they don't, you shouldn't be afraid to ask, what is the budget for this role? Because that's something they should be given. If you are in another state where it's not, you can easily research that. I used to use Glassdoor a lot. And then based on your experience, if you're early in your career, you're probably not going to get the top of the budget, right? If you are more seasoned in your career, you have more years of experience, you have the educational background, especially if you have a second degree, you have a master's, you're going to command the top of that salary role. So you want to have that number in mind before you even head into the interview. You don't have to say that in the beginning if they don't ask, but at some point they're going to ask you, and you're going to want to have that number already ready to go. Another good thing to look up is the interviewer. You can look up who's going to interview you on LinkedIn. See if they have a LinkedIn account. See, if you have any similarities with them, whether you went to school with them or not with them, but the same alma mater. If you're in the same, let's say, Greek organization or club, if you have any similar interests. I do co-facilitate sessions on unconscious bias. So, it is something that we all are working on, but unfortunately people still do have biases. So a lot of times if you went to their school, and it comes down to you and another candidate, and they should see that on your resume as well. But, if you mentioned it's something you have in common, it may give you the edge. If you have any other colleagues, someone you may have worked with that you see they worked at the same company, it doesn't help, or it doesn't hurt you to mention, oh, I worked with so-and-so. They may have worked with so-and-so as well. And if you have a good relationship with that person, they could reach out for a reference. And that could also help you land the job as well. So those are the top things. Like I said, practice, 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 and you really need to do your homework.
Wow. Brandy, you see what I'm talking about? Wow. That
Are we
is,
done? I mean,
yeah.
like,
That's the first question, and that is just textbook. I can't stress. I hope you are taking notes, or those of you that are watching the recording, you need to rewind and go back up to the top of that because there were so many gems in there, and just a couple that I'm gonna just reiterate because I just think they're so important. All of them were great, Michelle. Those were great. Research, research, and I do want to sort of drill down a little bit further on that because I think you did um, talk about just Googling, but now using Chat GPT, which I think is good. Is there anything else there? I think you did cover um, talking to folks, but I think there's another piece in there also that I want to make sure the viewers get is that when you are talking to folks, I love this about all the way down at the bottom when you got to unconscious bias and leveraging that. And I think when you're talking to folks that went to the same alma mater, that's great. And I would say you'd want to have a one-on-one with them so that you can glean more information about that particular organization and use that as part of your research as well. I think that is awesome. Can't practice even the best. Let's talk about, yeah, because I know it. I wasn't going to talk about who that we were related just yet so early on in the interview, but let's talk about her hero Kobe Bryant for a second. Kobe Bryant, yes, some people will dispute, not her, but other people will dispute whether he was the best at the game or not, but the dude was good, right? And even he had a coach. Even he had not just the head coach, right? But he had a coach himself. And when you're that good, you are coachable and you take additional advice and you practice. Even though as good as he was, he practices and he out practices folks, right? And that's what you want to do. If you want to get that job, you got to practice, practice, practice. So just love that. I love the elevator pitch, tying it into the business, paramount. That's just great. Love the purpose, leaning into the purpose. All of that was just good stuff. So thank you. Um, let's get into, man. We might not get through the whole thing. Let's see. Here's the second question I want to talk to you about is first impressions. So how important are first impressions during the interview, and what do you recommend for making that a strong start?
Yeah, first impressions are really important because you might not get a second chance. So you always want to put your best foot forward. As I mentioned, I am a little old school, but you always want to dress professional. Business casual is important, even if, let's say, you feel overdressed for maybe what you're interviewing for. Especially, I know a lot of tech companies, it's very casual, but you want to dress business casual at least for the interview. And it shows that you're taking it serious. It shows that you're putting in the effort. You always want to be on time, put your best foot forward. Um, because, like I said, that first impression may be the only impression that they get, depending on how well you do. So it's very, very important.
Cool. What about virtual and in person? There's so many that have gone back and forth, and so that's still a thing. Even though maybe we've gone beyond and going back to doing things in person, there are still, for me and my company, we're an international company. I got an interview a couple hours from now in Sydney that we'll be doing virtual. So, what are your thoughts around virtual versus in person? How do you prep differently? Do you have different tactics between those two?
Definitely. So if you are going to be in person, you want to plan at least bare minimum 30 minutes ahead of time to be early. If you're in a major city, you really need to budget an hour. The reason being is one, traffic. It happens, but you don't want to be late and then blame it on traffic. You could have been, if you plan an hour early, there's no way you're going to be late. Another thing is the parking situation. Especially at these big companies, you're going to have to go through security just to get through parking. You're probably going to have to park in a parking structure where you're going to have to park all the way at the top because everybody that works there took all the parking. And then you might even have to go through security to get into the building. you want to be there early no matter what. So you want to prep that time in person to go through all those different levels. Um, because like I mentioned, if you're late, you know, that's a major red flag for employers. So you want to make sure that you're on time, presentable, look your best. When you look your best, you feel your best, you do your best. Now with virtual interviews, you still want to be on time, but you don't need to budget that much time. But what you need to do ahead of time, I would say even the night before, is I would send, if you're doing a Google Meet or a Zoom Meet, you send that to a friend or family member just to make sure you can log in smoothly. I know sometimes with Zoom, when I've had a meeting and I try to log in 5 minutes before, and now it's telling me, oh, you need to update Zoom. And that takes 10 minutes. Now I'm 5 minutes late to the meeting. So you want to make sure you cover all your bases and do that, like I said, the night before or hours before the meeting at bare minimum. Um, Another thing you're going to want to test while you're doing that is not only the link, but you want to make sure your lighting looks good. You want to make sure your sound looks good. You want to make sure your background looks good. And if you don't have a good background, you know, Google and Zoom do have like those green screens you can play with to give you a more professional background as well. Sometimes that's a conversation starter, you know, they'll ask you about it. So, yeah, you always want to make sure that. The other thing is, if you know that your house does not have good Wi-Fi, you need to call your friend or family that has good Wi-Fi, because that's going to be terrible going through if it keeps cutting out. And it's not your fault at all. But you know, that is a first impression. And if that's the only impression they have and you are getting cut off every 5 seconds coming in and out, the next candidate that had that better Wi-Fi and they could clearly hear everything they were saying, they might go with them. You just want to make sure you're putting your best foot, strongest foot forward, and make sure you take care of that ahead of time. So those are all things with virtual you have to take into consideration, you know, to try to do your best.
Very, very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, I really love that, Michelle, especially because it actually shows a lot about you, right? And your preparation. Sometimes we don't always know that there's going to be security at the building, right? So just making sure that, you know, you're prepared in advance. And I think that I know when I've interviewed people in the past, those that were really prepared, they definitely got extra brownie points from me. So really great points. Now, you alluded to this earlier. You were talking about, you know, answering, you know, more difficult questions, right? So, what strategies do you use when, you know, handling those difficult questions? And could you provide an example of how you, like, maybe you've navigated those difficult questions in the past?
Yeah. So, like I said, practice, practice, practice. So, one of the main things is I always keep these in my back pocket. So, I have already prepared, like I said, name a challenging time where something didn't go your way and how you navigated it. What's a weakness that you have? Those are questions that you're going to want to prepare for. And you're going to want to use, like I said, a very authentic answer something that's happened to you where it was challenging, something where you know it didn't go well, even if it was beyond your control, and you want to emphasize what you did in the future to make sure that A, never happened again, or B, what you did in the moment, you know, that fixed the situation. If I, you know, there have been times where, you know, maybe they didn't ask me that exact question, they asked me another question that I wasn't prepared for, even though I did all the practice. So one of the things that I do is go, wow, that's a really good question. Give me a moment while I think about that. And, you know, I'll pause for a second and try to think of, you know, a time, um, showcase a time where, you know, whatever the question may be. And so, yeah, sometimes you may need that minute and say, you know, great question. You know, let me think about that and then give an authentic, true answer. But like I said, use ChatGPT and try to you know, have those questions already prepared. But if not, you know, if you need a minute to think about it, say, let me have a minute, and then come with your best answer.
Awesome. I love that sort of natural pivot, you know, to give me a moment. So speaking of I guess segueing into the next question, soft skills. So, in today's job market, soft skills are, increasingly valued. How do you recommend candidates best showcase these skills during an interview?
Yeah, I think if you're a great candidate, your soft skills are shown. So, one thing is you don't need to say, list out your soft skills. What you should really be focusing on is a project you led, or, a project you accomplished, whatever different things that you did in your previous experience, that showcase those skills. So if you led a project, and you want to lead also with data. So if you led a project, and you led a team of you know 10 people, or you hosted an event where there was 500 people, you want to emphasize those numbers. And so that shows, if you did all of that, you had great communication skills, you have great leadership skills. Those soft skills are going to show, when you are utilizing your previous experience, job history. If you are, not as a senior and you are fresh out of college, you're going to want to showcase that through maybe some organizations that you were involved with, some clubs that you were in. You may want to emphasize that in a group project you worked on, in school, some courses that are relevant. You're going to want to showcase that.
Cool. All right. So I know you and I have had lots of conversations around salaries and negotiations. So let's get right down to the basics. What fundamental principles should everyone out there understand about salary negotiations? You talked about it a little bit. Let's go down another layer or two.
Yeah. So like I said, you're going to want to do your market research and, have that number in mind. And then one of the most important things is you never lead the conversation with, the cost of living is X, therefore I need a salary of Y. You always want to lead into the market value for this role based on your education and experience and your value that you bring to the table. You always want to say, you're going to do great for this company. The company's going to benefit from hiring you. You're not going to benefit from them hiring you. It's going to be the other way around. So you always want to lead with your accomplishments, what you bring to the table. If you're already at the job and you're looking for additional salary, not in the interview process, you're going to want to lead with, all the numbers that you've achieved while working there. That's really important. And then also anything that's outside of your scope. If you're doing things at a higher level, if you're a manager and you're doing director level work, you're going to want to mention that, when it comes to negotiating your salary.
And when do you think, oh, Victor, are you going to say something?
No, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
And when do you think is like the right time to sort of bring that up during the interview?
So I think it depends on what you're most comfortable with. Um, some people, I know it depends on everybody's situation, where you're like, I really want this job, and maybe you don't care so much about the salary, you just want the job. But if you also have you need to meet a certain number to work there, you don't want to go through a long panel. I've had times where I've interviewed with 10 people. And if I went through that whole interview with 10 people and then they offer me something way below the market, kind of wasted your time as well as theirs. So it's never, you don't look bad bringing it up in the beginning. And to be honest, the recruiter usually brings that up in the beginning as well for that reason. They're going to ask you, what are your salary requirements? So I usually mention that in the beginning. And I don't think it's a bad thing at all.
Okay, and so thinking about like what you just said, market value, like if you're asked, hey, what are your salary requirements? How do you, sort of respond to that? Thinking about market value and whatever other, skills and all of that stuff, like how would you respond to that?
Yeah. So if you already have that number in mind, you can definitely say, this is, the salary range that I require based on my education, based on my experience, based on the market value. You can also, if you don't feel comfortable just outright saying that number, and also I recommend trying to hold out if you can, because you want to know what their budget is. So it is not bad to ask, what is the budget for this role? That can tell you their range. You can also pivot and say something along the lines of, especially if you're early on if you're talking to the recruiter and it's very early on, you can say, I would love to speak to the hiring manager to learn more about the scope of this role. So that way I can make the determination about, how much I would require based on the scope. But do you currently have a budget in place for this role? That way it puts it back on them to give you the budget, and then, you can hold off if you want.
Yeah, I think that's really strong takeaway, is to make sure you remember that point. I do want to circle back because I was looking to see if I heard comments. I want to make sure I heard something correctly. On the question about when to talk about that, did you say you were bringing it up, or it's okay to talk about it up front? Or I want to make sure I understood that.
So I was saying, normally in my experience, the recruiter brings that up in the first screener.
Yeah.
They normally always ask you. That's why I say you should have the number in mind. And if you feel comfortable and you feel strong, like I'm the best candidate for this role, I already know that I can command this much based on my experience, background, education. I already know, I've looked up on Glassdoor what, people make in this role at this company, and, you feel 100% confident, you can say that number. Totally. If you don't feel comfortable, it is okay to pivot and, say, I would love to learn a little bit more about the role, to see what that entails, because based on what that entails, that'll tell me what, the salary requirement would be, for me to take the role. Or, what I mean? You can say straight up, what is the budget for this role?
Yeah, because the thing, and I just wanted to make sure, I thought I had heard you say that you brought it up, but you're just talking about being ready for that question. And it's a difficult question, keeping it real for women, for folks of color. Sometimes that is, for a lot people in general, but particularly the segment I just referred to, sometimes it's a difficult conversation to navigate. So having that number in mind well in advance, and talking through it and practicing, that helps you be able to navigate through that. So thank you for that. That's great. Let's go another layer down, because now we've been talking about base salary all this time. But are there other things that we could negotiate, perhaps, or talk about? So, what are your thoughts around that? What are some other aspects of the job offer that you could consider negotiating apart from the base salary?
I think one of the most popular right now is remote work. So a lot of companies went remote during the pandemic, and then a few years later started to slowly bring people back. I know when I started at my current job, we were fully remote. And then they slowly started bringing people back into the office. And so when they slowly started bringing back people into the office, it went to a three-day a week work week. Now, there were some people who didn't come back to the office at all, and that's because they had negotiated in writing they will be fully remote. So even if your job is remote at the moment, you want to get that in writing if you really want to be remote. Because once you have that in writing, I can't say they can't, because, but legally they shouldn't. You should still be able to be remote if that's in writing. Another thing is, even my company, there's certain departments that now they're 4 days a week. It went from 3 days to 4. So if that's something important to you, you really want to negotiate that at the beginning before you even get hired, or before you start your role. Another thing, everything's pretty much on the table, to be honest. It doesn't mean they're going to accept it, but you can ask for additional paid time off, different, your benefits, your medical benefits. You can try to negotiate that as well. But everything's up for grabs. It doesn't mean you're going to get it, but it doesn't hurt to ask.
Awesome. Very helpful. Let's talk about a learning moment you've had. Can you talk about something that happened to you, a personal anecdote about a negotiation or an interview situation that didn't go quite as planned, and how you learned from that experience?
Yeah, definitely. I have a lot. One of my most recent ones I'll go with is a salary negotiations. So during this time, I just recently found out I was pregnant, and I was offered a promotion, and I thought, I'm also normally go through this process with HR. I never talked to HR once. So this was just told to me by my boss. Oh, would you accept this role? Oh, yes, I would love to accept. And then I was given a number. Now, I was under the impression that I was going to be able to, HR was going to reach out to me. And then, I had a whole plan in my head. I was going to talk to HR about this number because I was feeling, oh my gosh, I'm pregnant, you know, Black woman. I didn't want to seem greedy, but I knew that based on my market value, based on my background, the number should have been higher. Um, and so I was waiting for HR, and HR never came. So then I realized, okay, I'm going to have this conversation with my new manager. And when I went into that conversation, I was, like I said, not feeling confident, didn't want to come off as greedy. And you shouldn't have that mindset. If you have the background and the education, your market value, the budget for the role, you shouldn't be ashamed to ask for, your value. But I was. So I went into negotiations, and I didn't stress those things. I was like, well, I heard that the starting base for this role is this number. Well, that's the total wrong approach. You never, never, never want to do that. And it just fell from there. So I knew this going in, but like I said, I was just self-conscious. I was so nervous about it, and I really let it get in my head. You really have to be confident when you lean into these conversations and stick with what you bring to the company, your background, your experience, and things that you're doing beyond your scope if you are, because at that point I was doing things beyond the scope of my role, that was at a higher level, and that really could have commanded a higher salary.
Yeah, and I think I think the other thing that occurs again, happens to us all. It's happened to me early on, and we have the mindset. We go into a job and we think, oh, they're gonna think differently of me. They're gonna fire me because I've asked for that. And never that is never the case, unless let's keep it real, unless you are a poor performer, and if you're a poor performer. So put that aside. If you're knocking it out of the park, you're doing a good job, and you need to be realistic about that. If you are doing a good job, then you have every absolute right to go in and ask for what you're worth, particularly if you got the metrics behind you. I've finished this many projects within a certain amount of time. I have done X amount of things that were over and above, and you can quantify those things. Those are things that you bring to the table and talk about those things versus, yeah, I heard this, or this is what I've heard so and so has. That's not going to help your situation. But if you talk about the value that you brought to the table, particularly over and above, they will usually then come back. It might not hit your number, but they will come back. You've left money on the table, Corey. So
And just to add, especially when you start making a certain amount of money, you don't feel guilty. These are billion-dollar corporations, and it's really, you think it's a big number, but to them it's not even that big of a number. So don't let that intimidate you either, thinking, oh, I'm already making this amount. Well, no, the budget for that role is much larger. So don't try to sell yourself short in that sense as well.
Yeah, yeah. And we'll move on. We're talking about those of you who are, you have everything together. It's not just doing your job. You're doing more than your job. You're bringing additional value to the company. You will prevail. All right. Let's see. I think is it on you, Brandy, now?
It's on me. And so, look, I just want to echo Victor in saying all of the gems that you've shared so far. Like, I've been in the workforce for 20 years, and even some of the things that you shared, I was like, oh, I didn't think about that. So thank you. Love the bit about Glassdoor. use of Chat GPT and doing your research. Now, thinking about all that, is there anything else that you can share in terms of like tools or resources that can help with, interviewing and salary negotiation and negotiating anything else?
Yeah, definitely. Like I mentioned, Glassdoor was like one of my favorites because you can see reviews on the company to see if you even want to really work there. You can also see some of the medical benefits that they offer. You can see the salary ranges that they have. Indeed, salary.com. You can also utilize those platforms to research as well. Um, Another thing to even land the interview that ChatGPT does is if you see a job interview that you or a job posting that you're like, oh my gosh, this is my dream job. I hope I get even pulled, especially if it's for a big company. You're going to want to copy and paste the roles and responsibilities for that job into ChatGPT and then ask what are the top 5 keywords in this job description. And then you're going to want to pull those 5 words that they give you keywords and implement those in your resume. That'll help your resume get pulled to even land the interview. So that's a big one. Another thing, if there's a company you really, really want to work for, you can reach out to people for one-on-ones on LinkedIn. That happens a lot at my job. A lot of people will reach out, especially if you're in college and you're interested. And you'll be surprised. A lot of people will take those meetings, whether you're from their alma mater or not. If you are, that's another kudos they'll most likely accept. But a lot of times, if you're interested in a role and you want to learn more about that role and learn how that person got there, they'll give you, a lot of people will give you a coffee. They'll give you 15, 30 minutes of their time. And that's really, really where you want to ask a lot of questions about the company, what the interview process was like, how it's like for them to work at the company, because you may think, oh, it's glamorous. And then you learn, okay, maybe that's not a company I want to actually work for. So you can either do that before you even get the interview, and then you definitely want to do that if you are in the interview process as well. You can always reach out.
Amazing. Like, thank you so much. I mean, I'm gonna echo Victor again in that, like, I think this is like one of these like interview sessions where you're gonna have to go back and then like write down and then go back. Like you might miss something, so you need to write it down again. So thank you so much. And I think we're near the end. So I have one last question for you, and that's if you could give one piece of advice to our viewers today about mastering interviews and salary negotiations, what would it be?
So like I emphasize is research, 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 practice, practice, practice. Always be yourself, always use real life examples with the data, with the metrics. And then one of the main things is, let's say you don't get the position, always ask for feedback. And, personal examples of that is before I landed the role at Netflix, I went up for another role. I think I mentioned I had an interview of 10 people, I did 2 panels. It was insane. And I didn't get it in the end. And I was so upset. But I asked for feedback and they gave me feedback. But they did really like me. And the HRBP said she wanted to keep in contact and maybe there would be another role down the line. So you want to keep those relationships with those HRBPs that you're the recruiters that you're interviewing with, because just because you didn't get that role that you initially interviewed for, there may be a future role down the line that could work out. And that's what happened with me. I did see an inclusion role later on, a couple months after I interviewed and didn't get it. I reached out to the HRBP because they said they would keep my resume on file. I resent it. And let her know, I was interested in this position. I applied for it. She let me know she would forward it to the recruiter who was recruiting on that role. If it aligned, they would reach out to me. They reached out to me the next day. I had my screener, and then I did several other interviews, and I landed the position. So that's just one example. Another thing is when I was in college, as Mr. Simmons mentioned, I was interested in sports. I interviewed for the Lakers, and I didn't get it. And I was also devastated. And I wasn't able to get feedback from them, but I knew I didn't have a lot of experience that I could use in my interview. So that next year, I, joined some organizations. I really wanted to work in community relations, so I did some charity work, and then I applied again, got the interview again, and was able to show, you know, real life examples. And I think I even mentioned how I didn't get I didn't land the job last time, but I was able to gain more experience. And I think that makes me, the best candidate this year. And I ended up getting it. And then I ended up interning for, not only 1 year, but 2 years. So, if you don't get something and you really, really wanted it, especially if you really, really want to work at that company, get the feedback, do the work, and, apply again, and you may just get it. So those are my top tips.
Thank you.
Couple of things. We're coming to a close here, but a couple of things I want to put an exclamation point on. One that I heard a couple times were the one-on-ones with companies you're trying to get in, and I would just also, I think that is a great point. The thing I would add to that is when you are messaging somebody on LinkedIn, you're probably going to need to message multiple folks to get one of them to respond. But the way to get an easier response or quicker response is in your message. Make sure that you are clear about, hey, can I have 15, 25 minutes of your time over a cup of coffee, virtual cup of coffee, something to that effect, so that they know that it's a short amount of time and they're more likely for you to get a response. The other thing that I heard multiple times today is about being authentic. And I cannot tell you, as someone who hires for a living, that, and just as Michelle said, recruiters can smell BS a mile away. And when you're hearing somebody that's just giving you this perfect story that everything, went perfectly, that's, life doesn't go that way. It's particularly, I'll just say hospitality. Tell me about a time when something went, that didn't go your way. And they're like, oh no, I've never had a problem. Okay, really? In hospitality? Okay, that's a problem right out the gate. So be authentic. I cannot stress that enough. So that's a great point. Michelle, how many times did you apply for Netflix? How many times was it? Do you think, if you had to guess?
I honestly can't even put a number on it, but I would say over like years, I probably applied at least a couple times over a period of years.
Yeah.
Same with Disney. I used to work at Disney prior, and I applied a lot of times that I'm like, okay, are these just automatic thanks but no thanks coming through? Like, are they even looking at my stuff? So yeah, perseverance. It's a tough job market. So you got to keep, and even if you get that interview, like I said, and you don't get it, ask for feedback. And then work on that, and it may align. And also, like I said, if you're professional, authentic, and you keep those relationships with HRBP, sometimes they're like, oh, you didn't get this role, but we really, really liked you. We'd love to keep in contact should another role come. And that's really important to keep those relationships, because another role could come, and that one may work out for you.
Well, we're gonna thank you for that. We're gonna close down, and I'm excited. I think it's perfect that you mentioned perseverance, because, as I said when I was promoting this out on LinkedIn, I might be biased, but I'm really looking forward to this. And yeah, it's true. I do have a bias about Michelle, but what it would be easy for me to say, I taught her everything she knows, and while some of that might be true, a lot that she talked about is stuff that she figured out on her own and she did on her own. Perseverance, absolutely, is something she knows, and I know we talk about that all the time, about persevering and overcoming adversity. But a lot that she gave you today was just straight from her own experience, her going in there and figuring it out and making it happen. And so I can't be prouder. Thank you so much for this. This was a great, great show today. And we'll have to think about, we're gonna have to have you back on this show. You were so good. We're gonna have to figure out what other topic we'll talk about. Maybe it'll be a D&I topic after one of your next presentations, after you're flying off onto to another event when you get back. Maybe we'll talk about that and see if it's one appropriate for our careers and collaboration group. So Michelle, thank you. Brandy, good to see you. Thank you for making your way here as well, and thank you that
Yes,
made their way to the call. I see a couple of texts come through. Do we have? I don't think I saw any questions. Brandy, did you see any questions come through
I
before
haven't
we
seen
do
any, but
shut down?
I'm directly on that app because I'm on my phone. So yeah, I haven't seen anything come through though.
Okay. All right. And then I did get one message that came to me, said that there was some echoing there. So we'll have to figure that out. Sorry, folks, for the echoes. We'll get that figured out next time. Otherwise, everybody, thanks so much and have a great day. And I'm going to end the stream.